So as some of the other videos have turned out, there's always some sort of limit. How apropos the timeliness of Saturn in this whole topic we're dealing with today. So Saturn, I ended up with Saturn in Leo. But Saturn in Virgo is, of course, limitations with health, limitations with sort of like perfection, anything to do with Virgo, really. Kind of hold it back and say there's some issues that happen with specifically health and also some sort of like work stuff. So any work routine that gets affected, curiosity kind of becomes a little too numbed down. Like out of all the earth signs, Virgo is the one that's the most curious, the most active. And it's also the most flexible because it is a mutable sign. So what that means is for a person, they tend to be flexible. But with Saturn there, it kind of puts a dampener on the whole thing. And we go into Virgo. We go into Libra, sorry. And Saturn in Libra is pretty much like my placement. It's challenges or runs challenges like difficulties or limitations with relationships, how one relates with other people. There's sort of an imbalance. It's kind of like an awkward sort of placement. It's, although it is exalted, it means that, like I mentioned before, Saturn in Libra, people tend to experience loneliness if they see it that way. Of course, it's more like just you have to kind of learn how to be with yourself, have a relationship with yourself. That's what Saturn is trying to teach you and saying you can't always just get what you want. It's a kind of like Saturn is like the I guess the image I get is like of Odin, kind of like the all-father sort of thing, the kind of like the disciplinarian kind of, that's in a negative way. But to see that there's a reason for that. There's a reason for the order, there's a reason for the structure, there's a reason for that stuff. If we misuse Saturn, it becomes tyrannical, almost like Pluto. It's sort of a power thing as well, but more like creating a lot of boundaries and limitations and saying no, 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 no. Right? So Saturn in Libra is one of those things where it's like you come off kind of unusual or awkward in relationships. Not unusual, awkward. And it kind of borders on awkward, unusual because, it's the planet before Uranus. In fact, there's also Chiron, which is an asteroid, but it still applies the same way, where it's like, it's still kind of like, it heads in that direction where the limitations kind of, there's a link between limitations and eccentricity and weirdness and unusualness, because the more you become like the outsider, the limits, the sort of like no this, no that, it kind of, it's the hermit. It's like the loner sort of syndrome, right? But there's always a gift to that. There's a gift to everything that Saturn tells us. Saturn in our psyche is having limitations is a good thing, because that means we put the brakes on things that can become too much. There's always such a thing as too much, even with Saturn itself. So Saturn reminds us of the fact that when we have limits, it doesn't mean to say no to everything. It just means that it's time to pause, time to take a break. It's time to say, okay, what is the lesson I have to learn from this, right? So then going to Saturn into Scorpio, people in Saturn and Scorpio have very limitations with power. Definitely, like, they kind of transform more like, in a way, almost inwardly and practically. They experience emotions through a practical level and say, there's also a karmic thing also, of course, with this whole thing. Like I said, when you don't pay attention to how you use your own power, how you use the energy of transformation, the energy of change, the energy of those things. Too much change can be very detrimental as well. There needs to be stability. That's the balance of the universe, right? Right? Creation, destruction, life, death. There has to be a balance, always. Then we go, so that, there's that. Power also was, I would say, Saturn in Scorpio. People have limitations or challenges with also kind of like relationships and how one relates with other people, with another person, like trust. In this case, to put a hold into that, if in any case like distrust, and say now kind of like take it one step at a time and say maybe you can trust. You just have to kind of reword things. You have to reformat everything. Remember, Saturn is also the planet of matter. So it makes more sense in their 3D dimension that we live in this planet. Saturn is, perfect for that, where because we learn to work with the material, we work with the 3D dimension and say, right, before we go into Uranus, which is like, I would say Uranus is like heading outwards. It teaches us to be more, those planets, anything Uranus onwards, is more towards the direction of 4D or 5D or even further, right? Towards lightness, towards relax, towards shedding of all that stuff. That's whether you're talking about Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, or even further like Ceres and Eris and Makemake or whatever, those things, right? It's all about the transformation, all about that. It's peeling away the 3D stuff and saying, but 3D has its purpose, right? And Saturn teaches us that and say, what can we learn from this world? Saturn in Sagittarius, of course, limitations with one's own belief systems, one's own optimism, one's own kind of headed towards something that is probably could be seen as over optimism, over zealousness, over adventurousness. So can't always be like that. Like I said, Saturn puts the brake on that. Right? Hindrance is not always a hindrance. It's like a roadblock, right? Saturn says there's a roadblock here. Go around it. Right? There's more than one way or more than 10 million ways to get to the same idea. It doesn't have to be the same form. I guess Saturn also teaches us that it's like it doesn't have to be that same form. It could be like, for example, just because we want money doesn't mean that we'll need to get money. What is money but a symbolism of freedom? So there you go. But what is freedom? Even itself, freedom is, even though it's abstract, what else is freedom? What is freedom? Is it always getting what you want? Living in a mansion, having that 7K a month sort of income? Is it that kind of thing? Is it getting is it having everything that you always wanted, you wish for? Is it always like that? Not necessarily, because there's always divine inspiration, divine placement, divine timing. And Saturn puts that there and says, here's the gate, and saying, you've had enough of that delusion, and saying, wake up, wake up, right? Saturn prepares the way for transformation outside of itself, right? In the other planets. Saturn in Capricorn is right at home, where a person is able to really slowly manifest their own desire because they work hard at it. It's discipline, it's focus, has a direction that has an earthly sort of material-based sort of function, so to speak. Like you learn how to, you understand that there's a reason for hard work. People with Saturn, I would say people with Saturn Capricorn probably enjoy, it's almost like in Libra where it's like we enjoy loneliness, but it's not loneliness. We enjoy aloneness. We enjoy solitude. We enjoy that sort of like the peace and quiet sort of, right? So there's a kind of a tie between Saturn in Libra, Saturn in and Capricorn. Capricorn is in this course more about the goal direction. Even though it is still at home, it puts a direction. It leads us towards a direction of, or the native who has this placement is learning and continues to learn that success may come in different ways as well, right? Also the ego. When I say ego, I mean like reputation, like your place in the world. 10th house stuff, right? Now Saturn in Aquarius is now puts a dampener. It sounds funny way of saying things. Puts a kind of a break on inspiration or aspiration, hopes, community. Like it's almost like Libra, where it's like this is social aspect, where the Aquarian probably has untapped ideas, and probably most likely will just have to work for it rather than wait for thoughts and inspiration to come here. But some action it's a very earth thing. Action. It's also fire, but it's also earth thing, where it's like an action. Just like with air and water, right? Air and water have like communication between these. They share that in common. Where fire and earth have action in common. When I say action, I don't necessarily mean like doing something, but when it's here and it's ready, it's in front of you, the material is in front of you, the action, physical, material thing is in front of you, whatever deed you have to do, whatever action you have to take, that's what it is. So in this case, Aquarius has to learn how to deal with those, the limitations of its own, like, I have these ideas, like, how did you get that? Right? Sometimes you don't reinvent the wheel. I would say that's like a Saturn thing. Saturn in Aquarius, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can invent it by innovating, because there's creation and innovation, right? Innovation is from something else. I would say that's a kind of Saturn in Aquarius sort of placement. Then finally, Saturn in Pisces. Saturn in Pisces definitely puts a break on limit on escapism, of course, probably one of the first thing, and over being always believing things all around you. There's limitations to how we idealism, how we idealize certain things, that you can't again put it on, ground yourself and say, how can you work with what's already in front of you, especially in our world as 3D dimensional beings still, who are transitioning to 3 to 4 to 5, and that's growing. A lot of people are becoming more aware, are awakening, right? So Saturn reveals that and say, you still also you can't just go running off to the 5th dimension. You have to work with the 3rd dimension. So in this case, this is where Saturn in Pisces really, really applies, or it's like, yeah, it's there. So that's all for now. I hope that was helpful. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any placements in Saturn that are like you have questions on, comments below. If you have anything you want to share, by all means do that. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.